Powell to Miami, John Collins to the Clippers, and then Kevin Love, Kyle Anderson in a 2027 Clippers second-round pick, all to Utah. Powell, remember, he was a borderline all-star. He averaged a career high just under 22 points a game last season. And this got some reaction from Kevin Love, who's become the king of social media, by the way. I was waiting for what he was going to be.
That's funny.
But this is how we weighed in. He said, I never thought I'd be a math problem. Welcome to the NBA. I guess welcome to the NBA indeed, Brian. What's your biggest takeaway when you're looking at this three-team deal?
Well, the reason Kevin said that, just so you know, is because he had to be included in this deal for salary purposes.
Right.
And the Heat are thrilled with what they got in this deal. They had been looking for a way to upgrade the talent on their roster and to be able to basically get John Collins from the Jazz and then flip him to the Clippers for Norm Powell. That is a big upgrade to their backcourt. Norm Powell is coming off of a career season. His steady improvement in the mid part of his career has been terrific. This is definitely the type of move that in an Eastern Conference that frankly is banged up and is devoid of talent. This kind of talent influx is huge for the Heat. And the Clippers make a big move here. They have added a lot to their front court over the last 2 weeks, signing Brook Lopez to be Ivica Zubac's backup, and now adding John Collins, a frontline power forward in the last year of his contract. You assume he's going to be motivated to have a big season.
Man, Wendy, repost, retweet, heavy on the what does this mean for the Miami Heat, y'all. Like, when I saw this going down, I'm like, huh? So I just go through this roster tentatively, right? Like, Norman Powell, I am in on that dude. I don't think last year was a fluke. Certainly it could be one of his career years, but I think he's in place to be able to duplicate that sort of productivity the next couple of seasons. But if you give me Adebayo, Powell, Hero, Wiggins, and Ware, Kel'el Ware, I still think is a little bit of a gem in the league in terms of maybe not knowing how dynamic he is at 7 foot. But in the East, that is sort of open outside of the odds that you just mentioned for the New York Knicks. Like, that's not a bad starting lineup. You're sprinkling a little bit of Heat culture, if I may. And I don't know, you kind of got to see what can happen down in South Beach.
The backcourt is a little crowded. I'm curious if they're done making moves here. But since we're in Los Angeles and Clippers fans are curious, they desperately needed a power forward. That's something that last season you're kind of looking around and saying, all right, Kawhi cannot be taking on all of these minutes, right? Ramona, are they done? How are they feeling? If their East is wide open, the West is crowded.
Well, I don't think a team as smart as the Clippers front office would leave themselves bare in the starting shooting guard position if they didn't have a pretty good feeling that there might be a pretty good shooting guard becoming available via the buyout market fairly soon, and that's Bradley Beal. So I think you should regard the Clippers as one of the favorites for Bradley Beal if he is indeed bought out by the Phoenix Suns, and that comes to fruition as we've all been expecting for a while here. And if you're Brad Beal and you look up and you go, wow, I can play next to James Harden and stand out there and shoot threes, and I don't have to be the point guard anymore. I think that's a great fit for him. I know the Warriors have some interest in Beal. There's a lot of other teams that would have interest in him, but the Clippers have done a good job. It hurts them to lose Norman Powell. Right. I know it really hurt them to let go of him, but he was eligible for an extension. They have a well-chronicled discipline about not extending people beyond next year. They're going to have all this cap space. I don't know what they're going to do with it, but they are sticking to their plan, and so that's why they were trading Norman Powell.
We think that flexibility as well as being a team that wants to contend now. We saw how well, even though it was a loss, we saw how well they went up against some of the West's best last year. All right, we've hit on 2 of the teams of a 3-team trade, but if we have Brian Windhorst and we have the Jazz involved, we've got to ask Brian, what's going on in Utah? We got to hit the 3rd team here.
Well, what's going on in Utah is they're basically dumping all of their veterans. They bought out Jordan Clarkson. They traded Colin Sexton. Now moving out John Collins. Kevin Love, maybe don't look for housing yet. He probably may be able to get himself free. And that leaves, what about Lauri Markkanen? Now, Markkanen signed a massive contract extension before last season. And, from what I know, in talking to people around him, his expectation was that he knew the Jazz were rebuilding, but he was expecting them to start powering up. What it looks like they're doing here is powering to be chasing AJ DeBansa in the draft next year. Right. This team is very young, and so Markkanen didn't have his best year last year. I don't know if his value is as high as it was a year ago when there were teams like the Golden State Warriors knocking on the Jazz's door. But I got to wonder what the future of Markkanen. He's got a bunch of money on his contract, like around $190 million over the next 4 years. It would not be a clean and simple trade. But I got to wonder if the Jazz aren't going to be taking some calls, if not now, certainly into this season, because their actions indicate they're not building towards a team around Lauri Markkanen. They're building around their young players and potentially their future draft picks going into next year.
Right, based on when he signed that contract, I believe he's eligible to be moved now. They don't have to wait any longer to different deadlines. They can start looking at that now. Walker Kessler as well, I'm very curious. He fits the timeline maybe a little bit better, but I know there's a whole lot of teams that would be very, very interested if the Utah Jazz.
Starting with Mr. Dolan, to Leon, to the players, all the way down to the fans, is to build a sustainable winning culture that produces championships. That's why I'm here. I'm fortunate to know what it takes to create that success. It was a no-brainer for me. You know, the league is the league, and there's always going to be ebbs and flows in terms of how the hiring and firing process goes, and you just embrace it and keep moving forward.
Is there a reverence whenever Mike Brown speaks? Welcoming in our panel, our senior writer Ramona Shelburne, our senior writer Brian Windhorst, and I'm so glad we have our do-it-all analyst Monica McNutt here in Los Angeles as well. I'm glad we have you here today, Monica, because amongst your 50-11 jobs, one of them is spending time covering the New York Knicks. What do you think of what we just heard from Mike Brown and his fit here as the new head coach?
Well, I think that he said all the right things for sure, and I buy them as sincere, Malika. When you look at this team, these guys have great personalities. They've obviously had great success this past season. There's not a ton of tweaking that needs to be done. Yes, you mentioned it in your toss. Getting over the hump, that will be on the shoulders of Mike Brown. But in terms of having an organization that is already committed to winning, that has been well established. And I think when I look at Mike Brown's resume, one of the things that jumps out, and we talked about this a bunch last week in New York, are the 2 Coach of the Year awards separated by decades, right? And so to me, it indicates that he's been able to adapt to this generation of both coaches and the style of the NBA game that has changed over time.
And he has won, maybe not as a head coach, but as an assistant coach. He's been a champion. He's been around the stars of the stars, the Steph Currys, the LeBron James. But when you're looking at a roster that is largely the same here, Ramona, and it's a huge head coaching shakeup, after the Knicks made it all the way to the conference finals, the bar of success, it's pretty freaking high.
So let's remind people, though, that when they did get rid of Tom Thibodeau, they met with a lot of the key players. There was interviews with 7 or 8 of the key players right before they made that decision. And so I think they're pretty confident knowing that Mike Brown will be well received here and a new voice will be well received. And I think probably his best attribute here is just his flexibility. You know, one of the things that happened with the Knicks, they had one of the best 2-man combinations in offense early in the season with Jalen Brunson and Karl Towns. That pick and roll game worked so well. Then opponents changed things up a little bit. They would put Josh Hart's man onto Jalen Brunson and they would dare Josh Hart to shoot. And the Knicks just never had a counter for it. And you saw that when they got to the playoffs, they were just very one note. And Mike Brown is a very collaborative guy. He's worked in a lot of situations. I first got to know him in Los Angeles when he worked with Kobe Bryant following Phil Jackson. And so this is a big job, the New York Knicks job, but this man has had some of the biggest jobs in sports already.
And he didn't mince words, right? He said, I am here to produce championships. He addressed that head on, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to like me saying this, but he has now been coaching in the NBA in 4 different